The last speaker is Susan Lanser, Engaging Robyn Warhol.
Okay, can you hear me? I have to say that I think everything I'm going to say has already been said except the personal, which is important. But what I really want to be doing right now is engaging with Sue's passion, Helena's poetry, and Jim's precision, and you're just getting my prose. So, just warning you. But I do have a voice, and as some of you remember, when I received this award, I had literally no voice. We'll see if this works. And I'm going to try not to cry till the last sentence, when I can't help it anymore. In the fall of 1986, Robyn Warhol's essay toward a theory of the engaging narrator appeared in PMLA, and my essay toward a feminist narratology appeared in Style. That startling simultaneity marked the beginning of a lasting academic alliance. If you Google one of us on the internet, the other won't be far behind. Engaging with Robyn Warhol for 36 years has been a pleasure and a privilege, and today I want to tell you why that is so and how it began. Clearly, ours is a story of what, in my book, The Sexuality of History, I called confluence, a convergence stemming from a deeper common source. In our case, the two sources were feminist criticism and structuralist narratology, both of which had been making waves in literary studies, but which were not on speaking terms, which is one reason for the tentative toward in both of our titles. But our shared insistence on the necessity for narratology to accommodate feminism, and in no way the other way around, was by 1986 an idea whose time had come. Robyn's piece was published just as mine was going to press, and I was able to cite it at the 11th hour. But our personal relationship began when a harsh critique of my essay that also attacked Robyn's was sent to Style, and Robyn was asked to review it. She sent me a letter, not only detailing her objections to that critique, but offering moral support for my rebuttal. When I recall Robyn's plunging with me into the narratological fray as a still vulnerable assistant professor, I think of Jane Austen's mother's famous comment about Jane and her sister, that if Cassandra were going to have her head cut off, Jane would insist on sharing her fate. Robyn and I were fortunate that our feminist interventions, instead of sending us to the narratological guillotine, became a path toward a post-classical, or what Robyn more fruitfully calls a situated approach. I credit Robyn for leading feminist narrative theory into its maturity, indeed into its plurality, for she has always insisted on the expansive term narrative theories, in the plural, rather than the more limiting narratology, to which I usually revert. Expansiveness is a hallmark both of Robyn and of her ideas. Her co-edited volume, Feminisms, an anthology of literary theory and criticism, which I still consider the best ever collection of its kind, was already pioneering in 1991 an intersectional approach that aimed explicitly, I quote, to bring together as many current strains of feminist theory as possible. 2 decades later, Narrative Theory Unbound became, again I'm quoting, the first edited collection to bring feminist, queer, and narrative theories into direct conversation with one another. And that too is entirely Robyn's doing. Some people mistakenly think it was something I had to do with. It's entirely Robyn's doing, for it stems from the framework she set for the amazing 2011 conference at Ohio State that led to the book. I do think literary scholars choose both our subjects and our theoretical investments as much from psychic as from intellectual qualities. But I know no one whose ways of doing are more congruent than Robyn's with her ways of being. Robyn does theory with an openness and a matter-of-fact humility that are rare in our pretentious academic world. Her ways are reader-centered, collaborative, and eminently clear about their commitments. Indeed, and paradoxically, Robyn's investment in readers underwrites her preoccupation with narrators, a preoccupation that, as you've already heard, flows from her brilliant distinction between engaging and distancing narrators in gendered interventions, to her explorations of narrative refusals, moments when narratives either say that they cannot or will not tell what happened, unnarration, or when they tell what did not happen in place of what did, disnarration. Robyn reminds us that this not said is often political. The anonymity of servants, I'm quoting here, the scarcity of working class or impoverished characters, the implicit beliefs about income and privilege. For Robyn, the unnarrated is also a signal to the reader to fill in the blank with the emotion for which the narrator cannot find words. Effectively, an invitation to co-create the text and perhaps to have a good cry over it. This is why the move from the path-breaking focus on narrators and gendered interventions to the path-breaking focus on flesh and blood readers in having a good cry is a shift of topic, but not of value. Both effectively make readerly feelings the grounds for exploring form. I remember finding having a good cry startlingly refreshing. It brilliantly forestalls the association of women with mere feeling by showing that feeling is never mere. Having a good cry is also one of the most perceptive considerations of the serial form, shared by Victorian novels, whodunits, and television shows. Robyn's reader, moreover, and I think everyone has said this, is always embodied, as she reminds us, reading always takes place in a real space where the reader's body sits with eyes seeing or hearing a text. That reader is thus also individual, and Robyn scrupulously refuses the universalizing power move of the conventional critic whose authorial we implicitly speaks for the reader. As she writes in Narrative Theory Core Concepts, such a we interpolates only those readers who can identify with the critic's position. It will marginalize actual flesh and blood readers whose identity categories incline them to come to different conclusions about the intentions of the text. And for Robyn, texts and their readers are, of course, always embedded in worlds where gender signifies, and she thus offers a corrective to colleagues who would sideline gender as a matter relevant only to texts that explicitly evoke it. But Robyn's correctives are as collegial as they are clear. Her clarity of voice is a sign of her investment not in performing, but in connecting. And one might say of her own texts, what Robyn says about Austen, that her values lie in her textual practices. There's a wonderful segment in Narrative Theory Core Concepts in which Robyn shows us how, through language and form, the narrator of Persuasion takes Sir Walter Elliot down without uttering a single word against him. But Robyn is kinder than Austen. At a time when the United States is so polarized, we could well look to Robyn as a model for how to reach across the proverbial aisle. Her capacious theoretical practice invites everyone to a place at the interpretive table, to orchestrate a way to advance the field together. That makes her career extraordinary, not only for the what of narrative theorizing, but for the how. I began this talk, okay, I'm gonna cry already and I'm not even done. I began this talk by describing my first encounter with Robyn by snail mail in 1986. I can still picture that envelope. In 2019, Robyn and I were invited to give joint workshops on situated narratologies in Stockholm and Oslo, which meant that we spent a week together as travelers. Because we'd worked so closely and compatibly for so long, I think we were both surprised to realize that this was the first time the two of us had spent an extended embodied period together after over 3 decades of connecting at conferences, on email, and by phone. Our textual relationship had already created the space for 3-dimensional engagement, but it was a special flesh and blood pleasure to spend those days with my brilliant, reliable, innovative, and generous co-conspirator. It is indeed an honor to pay tribute today to one of the most engaging narrators in our field. Robyn, my admiration, gratitude, and affection for you are in the end unnarratable.